Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Samurai Goddess. The goddess next door takes on kung fu killers in this action-packed martial arts Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Samurai Goddess in paperback and e-readers today. Historical Women in Crisis. One of my viewers wanted me to do another installment in the Historical Women in Crisis series. And for this installment in the Historical Women in Crisis series, I'm going to be talking about the Han twins, Jeen and Sunny Han. Now, Jeen and Sunny Han are a pair of Korean-American twins who are infamously known for being a part of an infamous murder-for-hire plot, where one sister wanted to take the life of the other and then impersonate that sister and live her life. Now, Jeen Han basically was jealous of her sister, Sunny, and was jealous of her sister, Sunny, to the point where she came up with this scheme where she recruited two teenagers to help her look to take the life of her sister, and hoped after taking the life of her sister, she would be able to go on and live a very successful life that her sisters claimed to be living. Now, Jeen and Sunny Han wound up on the road to becoming women in crisis way before Jeen Han ever came up with this scheme to murder her sister and take over her life, because Jeen and Sunny Han come from multiple generations of women who have been raised in a dysfunctional fashion, similar to the way I talk about in my book, The Woman Crisis, and my book, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. And Jeen and Sunny Han basically wound up on the road to being what I talk about in my book, The Woman Crisis, children of the corn. They wound up growing up to become children of the corn because 2 generations before, their grandmother basically was put on the road to becoming a woman in crisis when her marriage fell apart. And after her marriage fell apart, when her husband ran off with a younger woman, this left Jeen and Sunny Han's grandmother to be a single mother to their mother, Boo Jun Kin. And as they wound up becoming raised in a single mother household with Boo Jun Kin, who was left to go out and be a part of the 6 children her mother raised, this basically laid the foundation for Jeen and Sunny Han to wind up on the road to becoming women in crisis, because their grandmother was a woman in crisis, their mother was a woman in crisis, and that mother basically followed in the footsteps of her mother when her marriage fell apart. And this basically led to Boo Jun Kin being forced to raise her children as a single mother, just like her mother, basically proving a point that I saw in a YouTuber's video named Real Man Allen 73, where he talked about grandma's lies and the generational curse, and the generational curse of women basically being raised by single mothers, teaching their daughters to become single mothers, and everything that Real Man Allen 73 talked about in that classic series of videos that was made over 15 years ago basically can be applied here as related to these Asian women that are applied to modern black women. And the pattern of family instability was passed on from generation to generation, as Jeen and Sunny Han's grandmother and mother were single mothers, and Boo Jun Kim, basically after her marriage fell apart, she relocated from South Korea to Southern California, and as she relocated from South Korea to Southern California, she wound up participating in the paradigm of failed behavior that many black single mothers are alleged to have participated in, where she floated from job to job and man to man while working as a hostess inside of a gambling spot, I believe. And as she was working as this bar hostess for income, she basically was again drifting from man to man and differing from relationship to relationship. And basically, as she participated in these dysfunctional relationships, she basically was dealing with issues that impacted her mental health, I believe, because having sex with all of these different men basically led to this woman having the spirits and DNA of those men inside of her. And as these spirits and DNA of these different men were inside of her, they pulled at her soul. And as they pulled at her soul, this basically wound up giving Boo Jun Kim serious, what I believe to be mental health issues. This issue of this and the abandonment of the home of the father from 2 generations. And this basically led to her looking to escape, and again, looking to escape as related to her sad life situation, looking to escape that sad life situation that she was working as a bar hostess for income. She basically looked to escape through gambling, and as she looked to escape through gambling, she wound up again abandoning her own children, Jeen and Sunny Han, leading to them having to deal with first a custody battle where the father basically wanted to take one of the twins, and he wound up taking Sunny. And as he took Sunny, basically Jeen was left with her mother, who basically led to the kids being in and out of group homes as she was dealing with this issue of gambling. And as she was dealing with this issue of gambling, the home that Jeen was in was extremely abusive, and as she was in that home, Jeen had to deal with the anger of her mother. And then as Sunny came in from the father, after she got custody, Sunny was the one who knew how to comfort her mother as related to her feelings of anger and frustration about not being able to actualize her potential in life, not being able to actualize her potential as related to having a successful relationship with a man, and not being able to have the fiscal success that she wanted. This basically led to both Jeen and Sunny Han learning a model for dysfunction from their mother. And as they learned this model from their mother, their first teacher, they learned how to have dysfunctional relationships with people and how to cope and escape through gambling. And this would lay the foundation for Jeen and Sunny Han's issues later on in their life, as they became very competitive against each other. And I believe that competition basically started because Sunny basically had the relationship with the father that Jeen wanted, and because Sunny had the relationship with the father that Jeen wanted, this is what led to Jeen and Sunny Han becoming extremely intense as related to their rivalry. And this whole rivalry between these sisters basically escalated as they were sent to their aunt and uncle in Campo, California. And while they had this competition with academic success, it often turned into violent clashes. It turned into violent clashes where, in one incident, where they were 15 years old, Sunny stabbed Jeen in the thigh, looking to gain dominance over one sister. And again, this basically, both of these children, again, they were so intense in competition because they don't know the difference between wants and needs, because they were growing up in poverty, and as they grew up in poverty, they wanted just basic things, and those wants led to them those wants becoming completely out of control. And even though both of them struggled as related to poverty, both Jeen and Sunny Han both became valedictorians of high school, and they thought that they were going to go on for success. Unfortunately, the dysfunctional model that their mother provided for them put them on a road to not being able to achieve success, because like their mother before them, what Jeen and Sunny Han did was they wound up participating in the dysfunctional behaviors that their mother did, looking to escape through vices into the secret world, something that some women do when they can't cope with reality and they can't navigate through their emotions to deal with the stress and persevere. What Jeen and Sunny Han both did was look to escape through vices, and escaping through those vices basically took them off a road to being able to go and be able to live a healthy and successful adult life, to basically winding up on a road to a series of dysfunctional events. Now, Jean could have gone to college but didn't feel like she was ready to make the commitment, so she went to the Air Force. And as she went to the Air Force and did basic training, she could not navigate basic training because she grew up in a female headed household where there was no structure, where there was no order. And again, when children don't know how to have structure and order, they can't function in environments where there's extremely regimented structure, like the U.S. military, a place where you need to be able to work through the rigid rules of that strict environment and the high standards. And Jean basically could not function in that environment because she was not used to being able to deal with rules and order, something children that from single mother households don't know how to do. Moreover, Jean couldn't possibly deal with male authority and male authority figures, which are a major part of the military. And with her basically seeing women as her leaders, she wasn't used to submitting to the authority of a man. And that's basically what led to her falling apart in the Air Force. She wound up falling apart in the Air Force, which again is considered to be a place of extremely high standards and extreme high discipline. Basically, this gave Jean an extremely big inferiority complex. She felt like a failure compared to her sister, Sunny, who was in college, and felt like she was trapped inside of the Air Force. And as she felt trapped in the Air Force, this is where she started to follow in the footsteps of her mother, looking to manipulate people. And she looked to manipulate the situation as related to the Air Force, which was under the policy of don't ask, don't tell, which prohibited alphabet people from being in the military due to their sexual orientation. And she told commanding officers that she was a lesbian in order to get out on a general discharge, and was able to get out was almost able to get out of the military, and it dealt with a lot of blowback. But she managed to get an adult figure from high school, a food service director, to be able to vouch for her, to keep her from going to jail. And what they did was give her that discharge. And as she was getting that discharge, while Jean was dealing with the Air Force and the structure there, Sunny basically was also following in the footsteps of her mother. And as she was following in the footsteps of her mother, what she was doing was living the lifestyle that her mother fantasized, but living that lifestyle at the college of the University of Laverne, and living that lifestyle dressed in high-end designer clothing and makeup. And as she went out here and lived that lifestyle and had boyfriends and plenty of friends, it looked like she was finding her stride on the surface. But Sunny basically was putting up a front, and this is what a lot of women do. They keep up appearances, make things look like they're doing well, but they're not doing well at all. And Sunny wasn't doing well at all because, again, she did not have that discipline and structure and resolve that a girl gets from being in a home with a father to provide structure, nor did she have that nurturing. And instead, what she did as she entered the secret world was look to put up a facade where she looked to appear like a successful woman, but on the outside, in contrast to Jean, she was a complete failure. She put up this facade as related to things to maintain that scholarship, but as she was out here and she had the college scholarship, she basically wanted to make this lavish lifestyle. So what she did was she stole from one of her friends, or one of their credit cards, to be able to buy things like those expensive clothes and a BMW. And she was also shaking her ass for cash as a stripper. And as she was shaking her ass for some cash as a stripper, she basically was out here making it look like she was doing well, and making it look like she was doing well, and again, looking to create a smooth world that made it look like she was successful by hiding all of the conflicts, problems, and obstacles she was having in life, making it look like she was doing well, as Jeen was basically out here out of the Air Force, took a job as a blackjack dealer, and as she took a job as a blackjack dealer, sadly she followed in her mother's footsteps and got caught up in her addiction to gambling, as after she wound up getting off duty at the place waiting for other coworkers so that she could clock out, she decided to place a bet of blackjack, and eventually all of her wages wound up disappearing. And sadly, Jeen didn't understand how gambling worked in these places. She didn't understand that the entire game is rigged and that the house always wins. And the house wins because what they want to do is get you hooked as related to continuing to spend more money to get the money you got back. And what happened with Jeen is after playing some hands of blackjack, all of her tips wound up being taken by the house, and then she rushed to an ATM to get $300, and that wound up disappearing as related to the house. And after that, she basically lost a good chunk of her money. And again, her co-workers who had arrived basically blew it off. And again, Jeen didn't understand that the game was rigged. And as she was caught up in this thing, she got upset and getting caught up in her emotions. And again, got caught up in her emotions because what she wanted to do was win, not understanding that the game was rigged. So she went to the bank early in the morning, withdrew her entire savings, and blew $4,000. And again, this started where Jeen started to go into a free fall. And as she went into this free fall of gambling addiction, again, addiction that I talk about in my book, Addiction and the Woman Crisis, because again, women want to escape through these addictions, because these women can't really deal with things as related to their personal life and things falling apart. So they go into these addictions to try to gain some semblance of control. And this is where Jeen started following in the footsteps of her mother, betraying family and friends, and eventually wound up stealing about $40,000 in fraudulent checks and credit cards. And as she stole all of this money to go out here and create and gamble, she wound up creating a mountain of debt and eventually wound up attempting suicide because she couldn't deal with her life falling apart. She took a whole bunch of sleeping pills and eventually washed them down with liquor, but she didn't die. And as she didn't die, eventually one of the uncles she had stolen from realized his niece stole $10,000 from him, contacted the police, and had Jeen Han arrested. And Jeen was arrested and sentenced to 10 days in jail. And instead of Jeen being on the road from being successful as a co-valedictorian with her sister, what happened to Jeen is that she wound up on the road to getting arrested and getting her first actual conviction as related to her record. And after she wound up getting this conviction and being forced to pay restitution to the victims, Jeen basically wound up on a road where she had no one because she had alienated her family. And as she alienated her family, she basically had to reach out to her sister, who was living in an apartment in a neighborhood in Orange County. And as they lived in this neighborhood, basically, this is where Sonny's life basically wound up falling apart, because Sonny's whole lie about hanging out with the rich kids, the facade she made by stealing and working as a stripper in the city of Panama, basically what she did, her grades started to slip because she was shaking that backside for some cash and wasn't able to keep up her studies. And eventually her whole life related to the college that she was going to, as related to that scholarship, fell apart. And she blamed it on a boyfriend, but it really wasn't the boyfriend. It was the fact that she was trying to live a lie as a life, live a life in the world, living that double life, where she was a college student by day, but in the secret world, she basically was out here stealing money from people and being a stripper and again manipulating people. And as she manipulated people, she wound up losing her scholarship and then eventually wound up being in a place where she had to resume her studies in a community college, and also what was out here working as a receptionist, because as she went out here again, she wasn't able to maintain her grades in community college and now had to work as a receptionist to support herself. Working as a receptionist, basically scraping together a life just like the mother, as the sister Jeen came back in her life. So both of the sisters basically were not on the road to success, but were further down the road to becoming women in crisis, as Jeen basically was jealous of Sonny's so-called success, and jealous because she was driving the BMW and again living the one who had their name on the lease. And eventually Sonny would use that lease as leverage to kick Jeen out of the house a dozen times for not doing the dishes or making the food right. And eventually in May of 1996, the police were called to Sonny's apartment as related to a violence altercation between the two sisters, and Jeen expected to get her second arrest, but Sonny was arrested, and Sonny was finally arrested as related to a warrant for a friend's credit card she had stolen and went on a shopping spree with, and the receipts showed that she spent money on high-end lingerie, designer jeans, shoes, and sunglasses, and eventually Sonny wound up on the same probation as her sister, as her smooth world started to become rough, and as their lives became rough, Jeen basically got the advantage over the apartment, and as she said, as soon as I get home, I'm going to kick you out. And again, both the sisters continued to fight with each other, and eventually as Sonny got a hold of things as related, Jeen got her sister's wallet, ID, and credit cards, and her BMW keys, and went out here and looked to impersonate her. And what is more disturbing is like the movie Single White Female, which starred Bridget Fonda and Jennifer Jason Leigh. What Jeen did was, again, impersonate her sister, and as she impersonated her sister as she was driving the BMW that her sister had, what she did was use her sister's bank account and telephone cards and used them to make phone calls, and even went to the ex's house in San Diego and stayed with him for a couple of days. I mean, that's disturbing because that's something straight out of the movie Single White Female with Jennifer Jason Leigh and Bridget Fonda. I remember that movie because I saw it multiple times, and it was just a creepy film. And again, as she went out here and got with the boyfriend, I possibly believe she possibly slept with this boyfriend. This is what I believe. Again, so twisted, she was impersonating her sister while she was in jail. And as she impersonated her sister, eventually Sonny got out of jail and looked to press charges against her sister with fraud. And what happened was, as she went out here and stole checks from the boyfriend, who called the police, eventually Jeen wound up getting sentenced to jail and went on a work furlough. And this work furlough gave her 5 hours a day to leave the facility. And this work furlough basically laid the foundation for Jeen's plan to take the life of her sister, because as Jeen's life wound up falling further apart, it was where she wound up escaping from the work furlough. Again, a work furlough she possibly got due to her Asian privilege, and she landed at the El Cajon crash pad, which was run by two sisters, Nikki and Rita. And Jeen, at this point, wanted revenge on Sonny, and this is where she recruited two kids, a black kid named Archie Bryant, who basically wound up growing up with a dysfunctional beta male father and a beta male stepfather, and Archie Bryant basically growing up in that home where his father coached him to lie to social services, and later had to deal with a stepdad who stole the money he earned sending candy in the neighborhood. Archie basically had to deal with situations because he grew up during the crack epidemic, and he was friends with a Laotian kid named Jonathan Yoshi Sarath. And again, both of them looked out for each other, but they couldn't see the female predator in Jeen Han, who was driving a blue Mustang in the neighborhood. And basically, as they ran into Jeen, basically both of the boys basically wound up seeing her and crashing at their house after her latest arrest. And as they ran into her, they said she talked with a Valley Girl accent and seemed a little crazy, but that craziness basically came from decades and generations of dysfunction. Because as Archie and Yoshi basically got with Jeen, she basically recruited both of the boys into going out and participating in their plan. Because as she went out here, Archie was out here, he was an athlete doing pretty well in school, and his best friend was doing well. But sadly, what happened is they got involved with Jeen, who basically saw Archie as a tool, because a black kid was supposed to have access to guns. And again, as they got involved with her, she basically looked to get involved with them, and again was leading them into delinquency, turning these boys who were already boys in crisis on the road to further becoming men in crisis, and eventually got Archie to get a gun for him. And he got a gun basically that was a 2-shot Derringer, a pocket pistol, and that he got for $60. And after he gave Jeen the gun, this is where she came up with the plan for them to go out here and murder her sister. going out here saying that she was talking like they were Asian gangsters. And again, wanted the kids to know that, again, as the Asian gangsters, they would be able to go out here and participate in this crime. And again, looking to mislead these kids, she took them to a Ralph's grocery store, bought duct tape, twine gloves, and a single potato, and bought the potato to put over the gun. And they fired the shot out of the window of the Mustang, which basically the potato muffled the sound. And after this, they then went to go out here and look to participate in the planned murder of the sister, all for $100. Now, as they looked to participate in this murder, Jeen basically bought a bunch of magazines for them to be able to go to the door of Sonny Han's apartment, which she was sharing with a roommate, Helen Kim. And as Helen Kim basically told them that she didn't want to buy any magazines, she closed the door. And then Archie ran back to the Mustang. And as they ran back to the Mustang, Archie mistook Helen for Sonny. And as they mistook Helen for Sonny, Helen was playing a Nintendo game. And as she played the Nintendo game, she basically walked back to the door. And this is where Archie and Yoshi pushed in the door. And as they pushed in the door, they then invaded the home and then looked to, again, tie up Helen. And after the tying up Helen, Sonny came out of the bathroom after she was taking a shower. And after taking a shower, this is where they looked to tie up both women. But Sonny had called 911 while she was in the bathroom taking a shower. And both the kids basically thought they had Helen as Sonny. But the whole thing is, they basically eventually got caught because police caught them before they could actually do anything. And this is where Archie decided to try to run and told them to shoot me now, I'm going to run. But eventually the detective wound up tackling him. And after they tackled him, they were able to break up the entire attempted murder. Police were able to break up the attempted murder as related to things. And while they broke it up, basically what Archie tried to do was say, hey, we didn't really do anything. Just say we didn't do anything. It was a joke. But the police didn't believe this. And eventually what they did was wind up catching up with Archie. Archie got put into custody almost immediately. And while this was happening, Yoshi made an escape. And as he made an escape, eventually what happened was Jeen tried to use Sonny's driver's license to basically withdraw money from the bank and pawned off some belongings in exchange for gold. And she was trying to make an escape, and she went to complete a credit application for a 300ZX sports car. And eventually what happened was Jeen and Yoshi eventually wound up getting caught by the San Diego Police Department when they went to return the Mustang to the rental agency where she rented it from. And this is where they arrested Jeen. And after arresting Jeen, they managed to find evidence in the car as related to the attempted murder from the shot that Archie had taken. And after this is where the police wound up taking all the individuals, Jeen, Yoshi, and Archie, into custody. And as Jeen, Yoshi, and Archie were taken into custody, eventually what happened with Jeen is that Jeen wound up getting convicted of burglary, conspiracy to commit murder, and possession of a firearm. And in May of 1998, she was sentenced to 26 years in prison. And Archie, the black kid, basically got 16 years in prison. And Yoshi basically got a similar amount of time. And after this, 20 years had basically passed. And as 20 years wound up passing, eventually what happened to both women is that both women they went on with their lives. And again, Jeen eventually got out of prison back about a couple of years ago and managed to go on to go get an engineering degree, whereas Sonny basically is struggling in life. But both women are women in crisis because they grew up in dysfunction. They grew up in chaos. They grew up as related to having issues. And then Sonny basically wound up again attempting at 23 years old to take 35 sleeping pills. She also attempted suicide as related to going to the witness stand to testify against her sister. That was back then. But both of these women's lives were rough, and their lives were both rough, and they were both rough because both of these women sadly are a textbook example of what Real Man Ellen 73 talked about as related to black women who were grandma's lives and generational curse. And it seems like this generational curse that happened to Jeen and Sunny Han sadly put Jeen and Sunny Han on the road from the roads of being a valedictorian to the road to being a woman in crisis and a pair of twins who grew up to become women in crisis. Now, if you want to learn more about what leads to women like Jeen and Sunny Han growing up and becoming women in crisis, you can pick up my book, The Woman Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Woman Crisis at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you want to learn more about the dysfunctional paradigm of failure that women of all races can wind up in as related to growing up in single mother households or growing up with dysfunctional ideas about womanhood, you can pick up my book, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find Why 70% of Black Women Are Single at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me make more videos talking about the woman crisis and the man crisis going on in this country, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.